I spent last night down at Jackson. Governor Lee was at the at Lane College giving the state of the state all over again, and so that was helpful because I'm going to kind of reflect a lot of what he said, because if you didn't see it either live or on WLJT or on the web or last night, you know, there's quite a bit going on. And before I get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation today, which will be heavy on the budget, because that's my job in the Senate now. It used to be I was kind of, as one of the only lawyers still in the Senate, all these criminal justice and legal stuff kind of fell on my shoulders to help with that. But with the budget, it's a big task to try to be very mindful and stewards of, you know, the dollars that frankly we don't ask you to give us. We take them from you and then we spend them. I don't ever claim to invest state money because you didn't voluntarily give it to me. We took it from you. And so before I get into the unprecedented budget we have this year, I want to put it a little bit into context of how I think we got here. And this is all from the budget document itself. But one of the things that has changed significantly in the state in the last 19, almost 20 years now, is that in 2010, the percentage of government in Tennessee as part of the state's GDP was 12.6%. So 12.6% of Tennessee's GDP was government. In 2018, it's down to 11.1%. So we have shrank government as a portion of GDP by 1.5%. And what that has yielded is which is our GDP is the 19th largest economy in the U.S., which is also the largest economy in the world. So I don't know what Tennessee's economy is as a portion of the world's economy, but it's probably a pretty great amount compared to most countries in the world. It has our economy, or our GDP, has increased up over $100 billion in that 8-year period, from $255 billion in 2010 to $364 billion is the state's economy, just Tennessee alone. And so the good news is, while this economy is growing and the portion of your money that you've earned you get to keep and government doesn't interact with, we've also seen tremendous growth, of rising tide lifting other ships. And what I mean by that is poverty in Tennessee has also decreased from 17.7% to 15.3%. We have increased the total operating expenditures in education from $7.849 billion in 2010 to $9.487 billion in 2017 and 18. So in a way, we've talked about this, I've said this for several years, but there's another budget document that we reviewed this year that showed since 2011, the General Assembly has increased spending on education by $1.5 billion. So essentially, almost every dollar we've had in extra revenue, we have put it back into education. And this year's budget is no different. We're seeing a tremendous expenditure in budget and spending on education. And so let me just give you the budget highlights before I get into the details of it. In total, we have a projected growth in the 21 budget, so the future budget. We have a projected overall budget growth of 3.7%, and so that is what the budget is based upon, projections of growth of 3.7%. That is all total revenue streams. State revenues, state growth is over 6% growth. So we're seeing tremendous growth in our economy, and that is showing up in the state's budget. Total new recurring revenue for the state of Tennessee is $917 million in 1 year. It is tremendous amount of growth. We also have total non-recurring funds of $1.2 billion. That is made up of a budget surplus from from closing the books of our 18-19 budget of $776 million. We have, in this year's budget, over collections above budgeted amounts of $499 million. We're also total seeing a reduction in government of $91 million. So even though we're growing, we're still trying to find those efficiencies in government and to be as efficient as possible in delivery of the services that Tennesseans deserve. And so we're still seeing a $91 million cut in services, or a cut in the efficiencies of providing those services. And so where's it going? Where does the governor propose those dollars to go? One of the largest line items in the governor's budget. Well, before I get to that, let me hit some other. These are to close out last year's budget. As many of you know in the room, myself and Representative Holt and Representative Halford secured a $5 million grant for Bethel University as a result of the state's actions regarding their teaching program, which Bethel has won at every level against the state's, what I would be so bold to call, illegal action. And it hurt their bottom line, and so we felt the state was responsible to help in that regard. And so we did secure $5 million in last year's budget. We weren't able, due to the language in the appropriation, the Attorney General's office and FNA wouldn't release the funds. And so the governor has been, I'm thankful to Governor Lee for putting it into the supplemental appropriations as well. And so that'll be a grant to Bethel University upon the budget becoming law of $5 million. Also of interest, the Ag Enhancement Fund will be funded as well of $7.5 million. And that'll be $7 million recurring in this year's budget. So last year's budget, it used to be $26 million. It got down to $20 million. So we're making it 20, getting above the old number with non-recurring funds from last year. But going forward, those Ag Enhancement grants, that fund is going to be actually funded than it was before at $27 million recurring, which is great for local farmers who utilize that and all the ag operations. The governor's proposed budget also has $1 million recurring and $1 million non-recurring towards the Agriculture Enterprise Fund. And I don't know as much about that, but again, that is very utilized for local farmers. There is in education, well, one more rural thing. So the Rural Opportunity Fund will have an increase of $10.5 million recurring and a non-recurring $10 million in it as well. That is for rural grants, rural projects that help support local rural opportunity. There is the Hospital Transformation Program, of which Baptist participated in, is also seeing a third deposit of $1 million in that program. And what the future of that program is going to be, consultants were hired through the Department of Economic and Community Development. The consultants met with local hospitals, tried to help local rural hospitals come up with a business plan to help stabilize them. Well, they came out with recommendations, and unfortunately, some of those hospitals didn't have the money to enact the recommendations. And so what this fund is going to be utilized for is to help support those rural hospitals in implementing those recommendations to make them more stable. In education, let me drop into education now. There is an overall, so the BEP program has a minimal increase, a required deposit of $65 million. And so that's funded, but in addition to that, the teacher education salary pool portion of it is increased at $117 million. So that represents a 4% increase. I would love to say to the school teachers that you're going to get a 4% raise. As much as the General Assembly and the governor would like to say that, it's just a portion of the BEP formula. Your state dollars are still controlled by your local school board. And so as much as we can fund that portion of the teacher pay, the local school board will still have the power and the authority to grant teachers the 4%. They can utilize those for any certificated teacher. So there may be teachers that have a certificate, but they're in administration, they're not in a classroom. The local school board can decide whether or not they get the raise or not. They have discretion on that. We've been trying now, this is probably the 4th year, that the Budget Committee in the Senate at least has been trying to find a way to get teacher pay only, classroom teachers only, a pay increase. And unfortunately, we just cannot figure out a way to do it that can exclude other non-classroom teachers, administrators, in trying to do that. We wish we could. We're not giving up. We're going to try to do it as best we can this year, even if it came down to, just a bonus, just a cash bonus. Anything we can do to help those teachers. We're also going to try to look for dollars to try to support them with buying classroom supplies as well, because I know a lot of teachers are having to dip into their own pocket. We increased it last year. We're looking for money to be able to do that again. There's $264 million in increases to K through 12 education in this budget. Various programs, for example, there will be dollars towards literacy, meaning a lot of students, we've seen tremendous growth in literacy in the K through 3 grades, but unfortunately after they get 3 through 8, we're seeing drop-offs in literacy. And so we're going to now support those teachers in those higher grades with literacy training and materials, which is really critical. They don't have the materials to maintain the progress we're making on literacy. There will be rural principal development. There's $500,000. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this right. Yeah, $500,000 for supporting rural principals and just better being leadership within their own schools. There is support for, I'm trying to look for the large ones. So the literacy initiative is $11.25 million recurring and $39 million non-recurring. So that's there's some teaching positions, but then there's also that component that is the materials. And so tremendous amounts of spending on those to help support our teachers. There's also some money to support more AP courses in the classrooms, especially in rural Tennessee. A lot of teachers we hear from struggle with students now who are suffering from mental health problems at home and throughout their life. And so we've created endowed a $250 million trust fund that'll be used to help support education and mental health. The initial spending on the money, the goal of the money is that's an endowment. We want to spend only the interest off of that as much as possible and support mental health initiatives. The first part of the money will be used to do an assessment of the needs in local schools towards those mental health needs, trying to curb the rates of suicide we're seeing increase in the school systems is one of the main priorities. But in the future, there's also some dollars for, it is called another education trust, and I'll find the name of it here. Oh, the Volunteer Public Education Trust Fund. There's an initial $15 million non-recurring deposited in that. And the intent with that is, one, you could use those dollars to match it with other charity dollars that are available, like, for example, the Gates Foundation, perhaps. But that would be seed money we would like to continue to use, and it'd be funds set aside into a trust. The trustees of that trust would be able to utilize those funds without having to come back to the General Assembly for appropriation of those monies. So it'd be a lot faster of a process to be able to use those. Commissioner Schwinn, which I didn't get to go, but Commissioner of Education, Penny Schwinn, was at West Carroll this morning, and I'm sure she talked about it, but what the intent with that would be is pilot projects. Different innovations that are throughout the state that maybe are working in one area, they want the flexibility to try to use them in other parts of the state to just improve our academic outcomes. In higher education alone, there's $119 million in new higher education recurring dollars. Some other highlights. One of the big initiatives, almost $30 million, like I said, of mental health. Mental health is an issue we recognize across the state. A lot of people are having to deal with, and that we have to increase our spending on that to try to help address it. We see it mainly a lot of times in the local jail system, frankly. And so part of the criminal justice, the governor's really going to focus in on criminal justice reform in Tennessee as well, trying to provide supports because 95% of everybody in our criminal justice system is coming out. Very few get a life sentence. And so they're going to be your neighbors, and what are they going to be like when they get out? And so the state's really interested in trying to support them so that they don't just find life outside too hard, commit crimes against all of us, and end up back in the prison system, which costs you money. We want them to get back into the communities and contribute rather than be a drain on society. And so mental health is obviously one of those things. There's some programs out there for job assistance, training while they are in the prison system. A great number of individuals who are coming out of the Tennessee Department of Corrections will just serve out their sentence until the very last day. So it's like in the movies. You see when they open up the gate to the prison, they walk out, and there's somebody waiting for them, they take them off. Lots of those folks, you can imagine if you've been in prison for 20 years and that's your situation, the world is a much different place than it was when you entered into the Department of Corrections, and you're going to struggle to survive and make it in that world. And so there's a proposal, the details are not completely worked out, but that's a bill that I think I'm going to be carrying to help transition those individuals whose sentence is about to expire into the world that they've been out of in a long time, to help them try not to enter it again, at least give them the opportunity to have a better chance of not just recidivating and ending up back in the criminal justice system. Couple other things. One of the highlights in there, I know there's been some talk in the last few days about the mega site in West Tennessee. There's not been any lack of support or commitment from the state of Tennessee to continue to finish out the mega site. The dollars for the wastewater system has been already appropriated. There's just a couple tracts left of land to purchase, and then that project will be completed as far as that goes. From then on, the dollars, if we ever get a tenant, the rest of the money will be there to complete out the different infrastructure projects that are required. But there's really no point in building it out now and then you get a tenant and it's not what they need. And so there's no lack of commitment from the state. There's actually going to be a commitment to hire a different headhunter, essentially. Instead of using state resources to be that headhunter to try to fill it, there's going to be a private consultant that's going to be retained to help try to fill that mega site. But of a closer one of the bird in the hand, there's $20 million to help support a project that's going to go on by the ballpark in Jackson, and that is, if you've ever been to Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, there's a Wolf Lodge. It's a very large hotel with an indoor water park and entertainment complex. Jackson's getting one. The state's supporting it. The papers haven't been inked yet, but we feel pretty confident that that project's going to happen. And so obviously that's going to be a very big tourist attraction for rural West Tennessee, and Jackson, I think, will all benefit from that and having those folks come by and visit our areas. We just have to attract them to come to Carroll County once they get there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have plenty of reasons to do that. I mean, it's been exciting the last couple weeks in the meetings I've had in Nashville. I was at UT Day on the Hill was going on the other day. I was talking with Randy Boyd, president of UT, and Coach Fulmer was nearby, and we were talking about how, Huntington had Lyle Lovett at the Dixie, and they were just blown away that we had in Keb Mo and the different acts that the Dixies had. And A couple other people within earshot were like, what are you talking about? Where? I said, it's at the Dixie, the Dixie Carter Performing Arts Center in Huntington. I've never heard of this place. Are these the acts you get? I said, absolutely, these are the kind of acts we get. We have good food when you come here too. And there's a lake you can stay and check out. But, so a little, I want to talk about some of the, and I'll take questions. I'm probably going too long on presentation, but just some bills I'm carrying. One of the more, I don't know if we'll be able to get this one over the line, but this one will be a pretty big lift. We're looking to rewrite the Victims' Bill of Rights. Unfortunately, for a lot of victims of crime, the existing Bill of Rights doesn't give them the standing they need and the respect they deserve in the criminal justice system. And so I'm working on what's called Marcy's Law. It's been worked over in a couple different states, but it's a constitutional amendment. If it passes this year, it has to pass again in the next General Assembly in the exact same form, and then you will get the vote on whether or not it becomes part of our state constitution. But the current constitution just doesn't give adequate protections. For example, if you were murdered, do your parents get the same protections as victims of crime? Not necessarily. And so there's been a lot of parents who've been denied access to the criminal justice system because they're not thought of as victims of that crime, and I just think that's wrong. Another piece of legislation I've got, I'm carrying this for the Tennessee Municipal League, and so any of our county or town mayors will like this. You know, a couple years ago, I passed a bill that essentially protected homeowners and property owners to list their properties on Airbnb or other kind of platforms. The state's seen a lot of revenue, and if your town isn't collecting the hotel occupancy tax, it's because the people didn't go along with our proposal, which was initially to have the platform collect and then remit back to the local the occupancy tax. So Airbnb and other platforms just went city by city and entered into contracts to collect and remit for them. So TML now is seeing how much money you're missing, and they want the platforms to do that by law. And so I'm going to carry that bill. If it passes, those online platforms will collect and remit your hotel occupancy tax. Anecdotally, I think there's been almost a $22 million sales tax collections to the good by the state of Tennessee by those kind of platforms. And so it's a source of revenue that's owed to the locals. It's a source of revenue that, unfortunately, at the time, TML did not want. They would prefer to try to eliminate those people from utilizing their own property to benefit their own family. And now they realize that there's tax dollars available, and they want to collect those tax dollars. So I'm glad they finally came around to my way of thinking on it, but I'm glad to carry that for TML. The other piece of legislation, before I close and take questions, is we've been trying to crack this nut for a few years. Surprise medical billing. I see where the President and Senator Alexander have been on this. I had a bill a couple of years ago on this issue that we were unsuccessful to try to figure out how to do it. But one of the new solutions we have, and this is a concept you already can do with your property and casualty insurance. So let's say you wreck your car and you go to a car shop and you find somebody who's willing to repair your car. You can go ahead and pay to have it repaired, and then what happens? Your insurance company reimburses you, correct? We've all hopefully not had to do that, but if you have, that's the way it works with property and casualty. You can't do that with your health insurance, with your medical providers. There's a law in place that says you have to assign your benefits to your doctor. We want to remove that. So what that'll mean will be, let's say you're having a shoulder repair, and the anesthesiologist, you find someone who's going to read your MRI, or not anesthesiologist, let's say you find a radiologist who's willing to read your MRI for $200 rather than, say, $400. Well, if you pay them the $200, your insurance company, which you've already paid premiums on, will reimburse you for that lower cost of care, rather than perhaps a higher cost of care. And so it'll just give you more freedom to choose who your doctor is who your care is and limit your own cost, because otherwise you have no control over that. So how that I think will impact in the rural areas would be, of course, there's plenty of doctors now who just simply don't accept insurance. They can still not accept insurance, but they will still now benefit from this bill because they will be getting insurance reimbursement. It won't be money that's out of your pocket as a patient. Your premiums will now be covering that cost of care that perhaps in the past wouldn't be covered, because the doctor you choose to go to is not an in-network doctor. A lot of doctors can save money in their own practice because they don't want to hire additional staff and bookkeepers and whatnot to keep up with it. They're trying to get out of the insurance business and save overhead. So we're just going to take all that out and cut the red tape and let you choose your own doctor and hopefully reduce your own cost. So that's kind of, I've got about 45 bills, but those are the ones I thought that would be the most interesting. A lot of them are less interesting. But I'm glad to take questions. I think we got a few more minutes. I try not to be like a senator and filibuster you, but it's just it's a lot of money this year, and there's a good story that needs to be told, and so I'm trying to tell it. But I'm glad to take questions.
What's the proposed budget, the entire budget this year?
The total budget is $40.8 billion.
40.8?
Yeah. And I didn't talk about it. There's a $50 million deposit in the rainy day fund. So our rainy day fund is actually, as a percentage, it's dropped, but that's just because the total budget has gotten bigger. But the rainy day fund will be $1.2 billion, the largest it's ever been.
What kind of increase is that over last year's budget?
It's a 3.7% increase over last year's budget.
Most of that go to education?
The largest growth in the budget is education. I think even over TennCare, which normally TennCare is the largest. I can verify that. Yeah, TennCare growth is only, it's less than $200 million. So yeah, education is the largest portion of that. And one more thing, I didn't talk about this. I've been to do this. We have a lot of local officials here. The governor proposed $100 million in direct grants to cities and counties based upon your population. So each county will get a minimum of $250,000. Carroll County's, I think, is $350,000. Every town will get a likewise portion, a minimum of $15,000, I think. I've got that information available in Nashville. I can get it to you to see what you're proposed to get. The funds are limited in what you can use it for, although not that much. Roads, public safety, IT, so if you have a computer project you just really need to spend it on. And let's see, public safety, IT, roads, and there's one other thing I can't think of what it is. But
maintenance, isn't it?
Oh yeah, deferred maintenance. So and capital project. And so I would like to see that actually increase. I'd like to actually double it. I'm going to look through the budget to find another $100 million non-recurring to send more of those dollars back to our towns and cities that I know you struggle. You have limited ability to pay for things that maybe not long-term recurring costs, but certainly one-time money. When we see this kind of tremendous growth in the state budget, I think it's wrong that we don't send it back to our citizens in the cities and counties. There's lots of things. I'm glad to hear from you as well. If you've got ideas, if there's something that's come up over the last several years the state did that maybe took a little revenue away from you that we can send back, I'm looking for that. I'm interested to hear your ideas as well. It's just, in my mind, we're already the lowest per capita tax state in the country. And so while we are reducing taxes another $40 million this year through the professional privilege tax reductions, I think it's a good time to maybe save you from local tax increases by increasing the amount, or decreasing the amount of the state share and letting the cities and counties keep some of their own revenue, rather than it all going to Nashville and then we disperse it back to you.
What healthcare bills are you carrying?
Oh, gosh.
You said you had about
be-
45. I know
Yeah,
not all of them
that's-
are healthcare, but
Yeah,
You know,
particular to healthcare.
I'm in healthcare, so.
That's. I have a certificate of need, caption bill that deals with pediatric home health,
Okay, yeah, I saw that one, pediatrics.
but it's
That's
not really fully
Mine's for
developed yet.
long-term care.
Yeah, that's the only health-specific bills that I carry. I'm not on that, the way it works, if you're not on those
Mhm.
health and commerce committees, it's easy because there's one vote right away. But, so I don't have a lot of healthcare bills. But there's a lot out there.
There are. I've seen several. I've looked online just to see which ones are coming up.
From y'all's perspective, I know, there was some additional, well, no, you're inpatient.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some additional money towards the increase in the Choices Home program. There's a long waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's quite a large amount of money to try to reduce that waiting list for the, in that program, and I'm trying to find it here. 300 additional slots for the ECF Choices crisis population, groups 7 and 8, and, working down the waiting list. So that's almost $46 million recurring to try to work on that waiting list. Yeah, that's the only, for y'all's sphere, that's the only direct impacts I see besides just normal growth in TennCare.
In the block grant.
Yeah, we're,
Yeah.
we don't know from the feds on that. If you don't know, so the state of Tennessee General Assembly urged the governor and mandated, we passed a law making the governor, try to get our TennCare services delivered through a block grant. The impact of what that would mean is, while no one who's currently eligible would be impacted, essentially through efficiencies and being a well-run TennCare program, we save about $1 billion of federal money. And so we run our program, there's $1 billion left, and then we send it back to the feds, and then they give it back to us next year. So our proposal would be, well, let us keep half of it. Let's get $500 million, and let us spend it how we think we should be able to spend it. And we haven't gotten approval yet from CMS, but we've got a good track record with them of being we've kept our TennCare Medicaid population growth down to 6.5%, 7%, where most states are growing at 9, 10%. I mean, they're just gobbling up their budgets where
Tennessee would be the first one to use the block grant?
We would.
Is that correct?
we would. But the application's been sent in and we just haven't had a response yet. But that would be an enormous change in the way that the state would be able to operate, because $500 million is a lot of money, especially in the healthcare field.